without further ado, we are going to be turning it over to Bella, who is our guest presenter. I did want to share a couple words regarding her biography and just some of her accolades. So, Bella is a 24-year-old marine biologist and underwater photographer that is based in Seattle, Washington. Originally from Sao Paulo, Brazil, she dives locally in the North Pacific Northwest and also internationally. She does both cold and warm environments. And also, we're going to hear some polar environments as well. Her photography focuses on behavior, detail, and storytelling. After receiving a grant through Blue Green Expeditions, she spent all of January diving in Antarctica. Sounds like a dream come true, where she documented both wildlife and the realities of working in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. And that is the adventure that she is here to tell us about tonight. So go ahead and take it away, Bella.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Grace. And you were right. It was very much a dream come true for me to be able to do a trip like that. I'm going to try to share my screen, and you guys have to let me know if I do it right or wrong. Let's see. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for having me here. I so wish I could be in sunny and warm Florida with everyone, but I appreciate the Zoom meeting being a thing. I'll just get right into it. So, people always ask me what it's like to dive in Antarctica. And honestly, it's been very challenging for me to put that into words. So, I always tell them about my first dive there. That morning, 6 of us were packed shoulder to shoulder into a Zodiac with very little room to move around. Everyone was trying to put on all their bulky cold water diving gear on and get their big camera ready while we were all trying not to elbow each other in the face or send expensive equipment overboard. And while we were doing this, I could physically feel my heart pounding through about 6 layers of clothing, while everyone around me also pretended that they were feeling calm about the situation. Because no matter how experienced you are, Antarctica does kind of get in your head a little bit. Like I said, it was our first dive of the expedition, and we were at an uncharted dive site off the Antarctic Peninsula. And this was our beautiful view of that first dive site. And I think most of us understood that once we rolled into that below freezing water, that there was going to be no gradual adjustment period for any of us. So when the expedition leader finally counted us down, I could feel the adrenaline really kick in. So we roll back and into the water, and that cold, cold water hits instantly. And it doesn't just hit your face or your hands, it absolutely takes over your whole body. Your body immediately knows that this is an environment that it was not built for. And within seconds of rolling into the water, I realized that something was wrong. My right dry glove had flooded. So it wasn't really a dry glove anymore, but it was a pool of water in between my frozen fingertips. And at first, I genuinely thought it was going to be manageable. It was, of course, really uncomfortable, but I told myself that I could deal with uncomfortable. The dive itself was absolutely incredible. The visibility was good, as you can see on the photo in the right. And there were penguins zooming around us, and everywhere I looked was something new, amazing, and completely unfamiliar to me. Even through my cold hands, part of my brain was mainly focused on the joy of actually being able to dive there. But during this, my hands were getting a lot worse and a lot colder. Around 10 minutes into the dive, my right hand was completely numb. And then around 20 minutes into the dive, I couldn't feel it anymore and I could barely even move my hand. And at that point, after some quick communication between me and my dive buddies, it was pretty obvious that none of us were doing great temperature-wise, so we decided to end the dive. We got back on the Zodiac, and I peeled off my wet, dry glove and put on a new dry pair of gloves. And putting on that glove, I couldn't even feel the warmth of the new glove that I just had put on, but I could feel the circulation coming back to it. And the cold numbness turned into this very intense burning and stinging sensation, and my entire hand was tingling and it hurt so, so bad. But we were all still very happy divers regardless because we did just finish our first dive ever in Antarctica. And I think that's part of what makes environments like this so interesting psychologically, because your brain is trying to process like two completely different things at once. One being, oh my goodness, this is an incredible experience that I've been blessed with. And the other being, oh my goodness, this environment can hurt you very, very quickly. Later that evening, after the dive, we were back on our ship, and I noticed one of my fingers on my right hand that did not look very good. It was this kind of weird white color, and I still couldn't feel anything with it after almost a whole day had gone by, so I was a little bit concerned. At dinner, one of the onboard doctors overheard me complaining about my finger, and she came over to me. She grabbed my hand, looked at my finger, and very casually said, "Ooh, yeah, you have mild frostbite and some nerve damage." And I remember sitting there and thinking, like, oh my God, that was literally my first dive here. What have I done? Oh, and also, unfortunately enough, the finger that had been damaged with frostbite was my right pointer finger, which is the finger I use to pull the trigger on my camera. And mind you, that became very inconvenient for me during the expedition. But the part of this whole thing that really stuck with me the most was realizing that one decision could have really affected a huge thing I rely on as a photographer. And continuing the dive at that point hadn't felt reckless for me in the moment. I just really wanted to get through my first dive. But I learned that Antarctica has a way of reminding you that these small decisions do not always stay small. And I think that experience ended up shaping the rest of the expedition for me more than I expected. So, hi everyone. I know Grace kind of gave you an overview on who I am already, but I will say it again. My name is Isabella Zandona. I'm a 24-year-old marine biologist and underwater photographer. Some of you might know me through Instagram. My Instagram's Diving with Bella, or maybe you've read some of my articles before. But I'm originally from São Paulo, Brazil. I was born in Brazil and then moved to the Seattle area when I was a little girl. So I get to spend a lot of my time documenting the marine life here of the Pacific Northwest and also across the globe. But diving here at home in the Pacific Northwest has been a big part of how I learned to dive and shoot in conditions where visibility, temperature, and good timing are never really guaranteed. And that foundation is what eventually led me to seek out more remote and demanding environments to document. So I got to spend this past January on a scientific expedition to Antarctica after I received a grant through Blue Green Expeditions that made this entire trip possible for me. Winning that grant came with a lot of responsibility because I wasn't just there for myself, and it was not just a vacation. I was there to produce, deliver, and come back with images that justified this blessing of an opportunity that I got. And this responsibility hit me even harder when I realized just how rare this experience is, because fewer than 0.0001% of the world's population will ever get to dive beneath Antarctica's waters. So I was really operating inside a space where very few people ever get to document firsthand, which definitely changed how I was approaching everything mentally. Every dive, every frame, every decision underwater became even more important in my brain. But before even leaving for this trip, I had to prepare for it, and preparing for it was no easy feat. I've traveled alone plenty of times, but never to something at this scale before. So before I even left home, I was trying to think through every possible thing that could go wrong. not just with diving, but with the cameras and the housings and every little system that I would be relying on when I was there. Because I knew that once I committed to a place like Antarctica, you are kind of committing to isolation. You know, there's no scuba shop, there's no camera store down there. So if something breaks, you either fix it or you go without it. So the image here on the left is my office space while I was packing for this trip. And this was when it was already a bit more tame and things were starting to get organized, but it completely took over my office and in terms completely took over my brain and my world. The image in the middle is that those are the regulators that I brought for this trip. For Antarctica, you do dive with an H valve configuration, which basically gives you two independent regulator systems that are connected to the same tank. Because in extreme cold water, free flowing becomes like a very big concern. So if one regulator completely fails or starts to free flow, you can shut it down and safely breathe from the second system, which was kind of a learning curve for me. I didn't really know about that. And then the last photo right there is a little over 250 pounds of gear that I had to carry around by myself in the airports. It was very humbling, and I got a really good workout out of it. But to even reach Antarctica, after you do all this prep, there's still more before you even reach the continent itself. You have to cross the Drake Passage, which takes about 2 days to cross. And it's the body of water between Cape Horn and the Antarctic Peninsula. And I'm sure you guys have seen those like crazy videos of the Drake Passage, like those big waves. And it really is actually like that. And it has that reputation for a reason. Um, it's also where the Atlantic, Pacific, and Southern Ocean collide, and there's very little landmass there to interrupt the movement of water, which is why you get these huge swells. Sometimes people get lucky and they get the Drake Lake, and others get the Drake Shake. And if you can tell by the image on the screen right now, we got the Drake Shake. This is Sarah and I, and we did a lot of horizon watching when we were going through the Drake Passage. But one of the worst days we had on the Drake, we had swells that were around, I think, like 30 feet. So our ship, which was the Oceanwide Expeditions MV Ortelius, which you can see on the left right there, me standing next to it, we were really moving. And you can also see that that is the image on the right is a screenshot from a video of the ship going down on a swell. But yeah, and the best way I can describe it is that nothing on board ever fully stopped moving. So you would try to walk down a hallway and you would end up bouncing off both walls, and even doing normal things like showering, going to the bathroom became very difficult and quite adventurous. Also, sleeping was an issue. Like several times I caught airtime when I was laying down in bed. Here's a photo of our room. Sarah and I, we got to share this really cute little room together. The stairwells were also lined with barf bags, as you can see on the image in the right. And at first, it was, you know, all funny when we got on the ship for the first time, like, oh, LOL, there's barf bags everywhere. But by the time we were through the Drake, most of those barf bags were gone. I think I lost count of how many people I saw getting sick during the crossing. And I think that was the worst part for me. I did not do very well with that. I also quickly learned this about myself, that I was going to need a lot more than those seasickness pills that you can take. I'm usually fine with those, but I was not during the Drake. So I bought those motion sickness patches that you can put behind your ear from the doctor on board, which helped in a lot of ways, but it also came with some horrible side effects. Like I had horrible dry mouth. I was exhausted, going like in and out of really weird short naps. And after a couple of days of nonstop movement and the lack of sleep, I would have the weirdest and like most realistic dreams. It was a very strange time. Going back to the rooms, like I was saying, they are very small. As you can see, we don't have a lot of room to work with. So there wasn't really space to spread out equipment. So every surface that you could find really became put to use. I was always wedging my camera gear between jackets and towels so nothing would slide across the room whenever the ship rolled. And while all of this was happening, while we were on the Drake, we still had work to do. The second day into the crossing, we had to begin fully assembling and prepping all our dive and camera systems before we even reached Antarctica. So we were dealing with like organizing and putting together thousands of dollars worth of fragile equipment inside these very tiny moving cabins while our bodies were being thrown side to side every few seconds. And we were also trying not to get sick during it. Also, during the crossing, I found myself thinking about my camera a lot, and not like in a creative sense, but more in like a mechanical, like survival sense. I became extremely paranoid that something was going to happen to my gear. So I was constantly checking whether anything had shifted or taken impact. And my cameras, of course, were the things that I was most protective of during the crossing, and I guess for most of the trip. And it was to the extent that at one point the swells were so bad that I actually slept with one. I was like laying on my back and actually slept with my cameras in my arms because I was so scared that something was going to happen to them, and I trusted my grip more than anything else. Which sounds like slightly ridiculous now, but at the time and with the lack of sleep, it felt completely reasonable. And I think part of that came from understanding just how rare the opportunity was for me to even be there in the first place, because without the grant, this trip simply would have never been possible for me. It's just absolutely not affordable or in my wheelhouse. So there was a lot of underlying pressure for everything, not just to do the work, but not to lose the opportunity while I had it. And I think a lot of that pressure kind of attached itself to my gear. Um, Thankfully, everyone and everything got through the Drake Passage just fine. But the Drake really changed the way I think about expedition preparation. Like the crossing was super fun and difficult in different times and in different ways, but it also made it very clear to me what failure point awareness feels like in the field to an extent that I had never felt or experienced before. And crossing the Drake had been something that I had wanted to experience for a long time. And I selfishly kind of wanted the Drake shake, maybe not to the extent that we got it, uh, but it was very fun at the end of the day. And once we came out on the other side, I was already thinking about all the other things I had come to Antarctica for, including my first ever iceberg dive. This is Sarah and I very, very happy after our iceberg dive together. But yeah, so I had my first iceberg dive in Antarctica, which was the freaking coolest experience ever. But iceberg diving there added a completely different layer of decision making under pressure. Every part of this dive had to be approached carefully before we even got into the water. Of course, the photography really mattered for me, but so did understanding the structure that we were diving around and how conditions could shift and how quickly a safe situation could become unsafe. Here we are on our Zodiac that same day. It was a very beautiful day. We were near a Planu Island. It was just a gorgeous sunny day in Antarctica. But yeah, we were out on our scuba Zodiacs looking for a very diveable iceberg because not every iceberg is considered safe enough to dive. So we had our expedition team, the dive masters, they were looking for one that appeared relatively stable with no obvious signs of recent fracturing or rolling. We wanted manageable overhangs and a fairly flat surface above the waterline. So here I have a photo of some of the icebergs that we saw, like this big one on the left here. That is not a safe or diveable iceberg, but maybe one of the smaller ones in the background that are a bit more flat are safe, because the flatter tops can sometimes indicate that the iceberg is sitting a bit more balanced, making it slightly more predictable than a tilted or a irregular shaped iceberg. Of course, even then, there's never a guarantee with ice. The goal is to find the one that's the most predictable out of all of them. But we came up to this beautiful iceberg, and it was absolutely enormous and gorgeous. Above the waterline, maybe like 10 or 15% of it was visible, and the rest of it was hidden below the surface. Um, Underwater, an iceberg can extend out in different ways in these like shelves and overhangs. And these icebergs, like I said, can be very dangerous to dive because they can roll or calf or fracture without notice. And when these large pieces shear off an iceberg, they can land on you or cause all sorts of problems. They can displace water and create a surge that can pull you towards the iceberg or even under them. So we had to be very mindful. But of course, we found our iceberg, so we get into the water and we descend. Now, this dive was very interesting. Sarah and I both agreed that it was quite disorienting and very eerie at times, which is a whole story for like another day. And the visibility wasn't the best. This iceberg was so large that we couldn't even see the ocean floor or make out the ocean floor. In this photo, you can see what looks like backscatter isn't actually backscatter because I didn't have my strobes on for the shot. Those are little bubbles that are coming off of the iceberg, also mixed with a halocline layer and with the kind of weird hazy visibility that we were having. But the iceberg was just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, you have these huge walls of blue that kind of drop past you and these amazing carved ledges and ripples. And it almost looks like architectural with the way that these icebergs look underwater. It's just this beautiful, massive submerged structure. Here's a close-up shot of some of those beautiful ripples. One of my favorite parts of this dive was getting close to the iceberg and just kind of running my hands along these ripples and just feeling them. It felt very, very cool. Humble even because these icebergs are made of glacial ice that has been compacting for thousands and thousands of years. So you're really not just diving like a chunk of ice. You're moving and diving alongside compressed snowfall that predates you, which is a super humbling perspective when you're trying to make images of something that's much, much older than you are. Also, like I was mentioning a little bit about the halocline, these icebergs are constantly melting, right? So they have the fresh water coming off the surface, and that mixes with the salt water, and it creates these very thick halocline layers. Here's another shot. There's Sarah ahead of me in our beautiful iceberg. This mixing of the fresh and salt water also affects buoyancy. Like, as you know, fresh water is less dense than salt water. So when you're moving through these different zones, or if you're getting closer to the iceberg, your buoyancy can shift really, really quick. So at one moment you'll be at 30 feet and then you move closer to the iceberg and all of a sudden you're at 50 or 60 feet. So you really have to monitor your depth. So during this dive, you have a lot to manage. You have to manage your depth because we weren't allowed to go below 60 feet. So that was our cap. You have to manage your gas, the cold, of course, a potentially unstable iceberg, your buoyancy is shifting, and you're dealing with all of this and trying to build a coherent composition underwater still. For this dive, I was actually on assignment for Suunto for their new dive computer that was coming out. So before the dive, we had to come up with a plan with the model, who was Sarah, just like some general framing directions, because I knew once we got into the water, communication would be extremely limited with our thick gloves, and it had to be very, very quick because we'd be in very cold water. And this is where underwater photography becomes very deliberate because you want everything out of an iceberg dive since it's just so amazing. But yet I had to figure out how to prioritize in real time, like what is the strongest image available in this exact moment under these exact conditions and with this amount of time and risk. So this was my first image on the iceberg, and it's really not great. I mean, it's not the story I wanted to tell. The colors aren't there. It was taken a lot deeper than some of my final images, and as you can see, it's very dark and hazy down there. Every time I'd fire my strobes, it would light up backscatter or the bubbles that were coming off the berg. So within a few minutes, it was very clear to me that this kind of situation wasn't working out. I decided that we needed to move shallower so I could work more with the natural light and reduce the density of these bubbles and the haziness in the water. Here's Sarah again. So I repositioned Sarah, my model. I needed her body position to look natural and I needed, you know, the dive computer to be shown. So I asked her to angle slightly more into the light and look down towards the device. At the same time, I adjusted myself too. I dropped lower to exaggerate the scale of the iceberg and started shooting a little bit more upwards towards the ambient light to shape the scene. Still with a little bit of hazy visibility, I wanted to bring out a little bit more of the structure of the ice. So I moved one strobe closer to the iceberg so it would just kind of skim the surface and reveal more textures of the iceberg. And then I turned the other strobe off and just used ambient light on that side. And this was the result, one of the final images that shows kind of what we wanted, the product and the environment kind of working together in a single frame. And it made for a very, very happy customer with Sunto. And as you guys know, underwater photography in general is like this constant sequence of decision making. You're working with composition, timing, light, and of course, the risk of being underwater. And it's all happening at once, right? And you don't have the ability to pause or reset. And we, as underwater photographers, are always met with choosing between waiting for a more complex composition or kind of committing to the strongest available frame before the conditions shift or a dive needs to end. And I felt like for this dive, I had to find the strongest available frame. Because you can't capture everything you want underwater, and you definitely can't control every condition. But I do believe that the choices that you make in real time kind of shape the images that you get to bring home. And shout out to Sarah because she was very patient with me during this dive. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard the saying, like, anything for the shot, right? Like, we photographers really like it. It sounds very heroic and passionate. But in the field, especially underwater, I feel like it's rarely that simple. Because the moment you're actually in a situation where something rare is happening, like your decision making stops being theoretical and it becomes situational, super fast, and kind of shared with everyone who also wants a shot. So these photos are some of my favorites. It was the morning we had an amazing snorkel with penguins, and we were going to shore for our continental landing, and this was at Prospect Point. And a continental landing is where you're stepping onto the actual Antarctic mainland, not just one of the surrounding islands. It's super symbolic in a way that's quite hard to describe, but it's just amazing because you're physically standing on one of the most remote land masses on Earth. So of course we were all very super happy. There's Allie and I with our big smiles. We took our photos, we held our flags, and we had our good fun there. But then it was time to head back to the Zodiac to head back to our ship. But as we were preparing to leave, someone called out that there was a leopard seal in the water near the landing site. And there's a very specific kind of change that happens in a group of people when something like that is announced. Everyone immediately understands the significance of this moment. So I felt my face get hot like immediately, and my heart rate started to pick up. Part of me was thinking, like, okay, this is exactly the kind of encounter that people come to Antarctica for. This is why I'm here. And then the other part of me was already aware of something else, that, okay, we were not the only variable in the water anymore. So these leopard seals, they are huge and very intelligent apex predators. They sit at the top of Antarctica's food chain, and they can grow to be 12 feet long and weigh more than 1,000 pounds. So we're talking big animals. Some of these guys are bigger than polar bears. Like I was saying, they're massive. Their heads are massive. They have these kind of prehistoric looking jaws and massive teeth that are kind of designed to hunt anything that moves. And they even hunt penguins for sport. And I was going to get in the water with that. So I was sending up a couple of prayers for sure. We quickly repositioned the Zodiac, and I started pulling my hood, my mask, my fins on while trying to get my camera set up for this. In my Zodiac, I was the only one willing to slip into the water with the leopard seal, but from the other Zodiacs, more and more people were entering. And you could definitely feel it in the air. Everyone was sort of thinking the same thing. It was like, this is it, this is my chance. This is my chance to get that award-winning leopard seal shot that everyone dreams of. And of course, I dream of too. So I got in the water and I tried to move calmly towards the leopard seal. Now, this seal was weaving around this iceberg, the one that you can kind of see in the back, and he was probably 9 feet long. So we're talking about almost twice as long as me. Big, big animal. And with that, everyone else was also entering the water. And during that, it became quite obvious and apparent to me that the seal wasn't really feeling the vibe anymore. Its behavior changed, its passes became shorter, and it stopped circling as wide, and it began keeping more of a distance from the group. But of course, a lot of people wanting their photos started to close in on it a little bit more. So the seal was basically backed up into this corner between a wall of people and this iceberg that you can see in the photo. Um, I think that's the part of wildlife photography that's kind of hard to talk about sometimes because, especially this situation, it did not come from bad intent. It wasn't whether any of us were doing the right or the wrong thing. It was more like what happens when multiple right intentions overlap. There's also a moment of internal negotiation that happened where you kind of constantly are weighing the opportunity against the impact. And I also want to be honest here. In the moment, I understood why everyone was moving in. It wasn't irrational. It was an opportunity with a rare subject. And of course, you have very limited time when you're in Antarctica. But in my mind, anything for the shot suddenly didn't really feel heroic. It felt more ego driven. So in that moment, I decided to back up and distance myself from the animal, and I got out of the water, which was a real bummer for me mentally because I let go of this dream shot that I don't know if I'll ever have the chance of getting again. But after I got out of the water, the expedition leaders and others also kind of announced that everyone needed to exit the water immediately. But ethics in wildlife photography isn't just about rules or regulations, right? It's about reading behavior. And in my mind, I started to think about it like asking the question, is my presence altering this moment in a negative way? Of course, the camera does give us access to all these amazing places and these amazing animals, but it also gives us the responsibility to take care of them. And what this encounter showed me wasn't that like I suddenly discovered ethics. No, I've always had respect for wildlife, but it did show me how thin the line can be when opportunity, rarity, and ego kind of collide. I think it's super easy to say you respect animals when the shot isn't extraordinary, but it's a lot harder when the moment feels once in a lifetime. And what I realized afterwards too was how easy it is for a situation like that to escalate without anyone meaning it to. And the ethics around wildlife photography or just wildlife interactions, I feel like are always discussed in huge extremes, like obvious harassment or obvious mistakes, or like obvious disregard for an animal. But a lot of these real life situations are far more ambiguous than that. Like for this, I think sometimes it's just a group of really, really excited and passionate individuals making responsible decisions, but that collectively started affecting an animal's behavior. And that encounter made me feel much more conscious about just group dynamics underwater and how quickly rarity and opportunity can influence your decision making, even in a group of experienced divers and photographers. Um, But a couple days after the leopard seal encounter, I had one of my most amazing and most favorite dives, I think, just to date. We got to dive a shipwreck in Antarctica, which is like even crazy in my mind saying that that was even a thing. But this is the Governor. It's a massive whaling ship that now sits partially grounded in this harbor. It was originally built in the late 1800s as a British cargo vessel and then later converted into a whaling factory ship when the industry was really expanding in Antarctica. At the time, these ships were considered like cutting edge technology and they were large enough to actually process the whales directly on board. So for this ship, they were harvesting oil from these whales. They were also moving further and further into polar waters every single season. But like a lot of ships from that era working in Antarctica, it eventually ended up lost to the same environment it was built to exploit. Like she's still there. And she kind of caught on fire basically in 1915 during the whaling season. It was actually the end of their whaling season. They were having a party on board. And from what we know, this fire started below deck and quickly spread through the ship because, like I said, it was full of whale oil. So once the fire started, it really didn't take much for it to get out of control quickly. So the captain of the ship made a decision to deliberately run the ship aground in the shallow waters of this harbor to save all 85 crew members. And it worked, actually. Everyone got off the ship safely, but the ship itself was left there. And when you see this beautiful ship for the first time above water, you're like, wow, this is a big, big wreck, but you don't really understand its true size until you're in the water with it. This is me, and you can see the shipwreck in the background. This was taken by my good friend Jacob Guy. I maybe you can't really tell in the photo, but I was actually very, very excited to be doing that dive, especially since after learning its history, I found it so fascinating. And one of the coolest things about this dive is that the history is still there underwater. You can still see some of the whale oil seeping out of the wreck. You can see it kind of in the water, and there's a ton of whale bones scattered around it from the whales that they took. And the wreck is so large that you're never really working with it as a complete subject, like a lot of the wrecks that you could photograph. Especially since a very large chunk of it is above water. So you're just kind of working with fragments of it. So sections kind of appear and disappear depending where you're positioned and also how the visibility is behaving in that moment. The visibility we got was okay. It was similar to what we get here in Seattle. So I kind of already knew how to work with it, which was good. I was also shooting another Sunto assignment here on this dive, which meant I was working with my model, my amazing Sarah, underwater, of course, which added a similar layer to the complexity of the photos like it did with the iceberg dive. But for this dive, I was kind of finding a rhythm with it. I was really figuring out how to use the scale of the ship in the background and where Sarah needed to go. And we were just having an absolute blast. And of course, Sunto really liked some of the photos that were delivered to them. But like most dives are, it was over sooner than I felt it should have been, but we were all very, very cold. So we get back up. We handed our gear back up into the Zodiac and got ourselves up there. And everyone was kind of doing the usual cold water reset. Everyone was quiet, very tired, and very, very cold. And I remember looking at the ship when we were all sitting there and thinking, I will probably never get to shoot this wreck again. So I asked my Zodiac driver if it would be okay to go back in, but on snorkel. And he was very nice and said yes, but only if I was very fast because everyone else stayed on the Zodiac, which I did feel bad about since they were all cold and waiting for me. But I jumped back into the water and swam out to the front of the wreck. And I wanted to work on getting split shots. And I barely have any experience with split shots. So I knew this was going to be quite the challenge for me, especially in this environment. And almost immediately taking the photos, I could feel that it wasn't really working and I was starting to get frustrated. The timing was off, the water line wasn't really sitting clearly, and everything was feeling a little bit rushed in my head. I couldn't figure out the settings because the visibility in the water was dark and not the best. And then we had this gorgeous blue sky, but also these big, very, very white and snowy mountains in the background. And the images were starting to really reflect my frustrations through them. But I decided to push through the frustrations and I got a few frames I actually liked. This was one of them. And as you can see, the ship is grounded, but the visibility was so bad that you couldn't actually see the ocean floor. So it kind of looks like she's just floating there, but she's not. And you have those beautiful, very white mountains behind. And we were blessed with another gorgeous sunny day in Antarctica. So you can see that gorgeous blue sky in the background. Here I am. This is a photo that Klaus took of me. It's I look a little silly in it, but that was the photo of me taking this photo. These photos were not exactly what I had originally imagined when I decided to get back in, but it felt like each failed shot started to become a lesson for me. And the photos that worked existed because I pushed through the ones that didn't. Here I am again. You can see me working on the right corner there. And here's another one of the split shots I got. This one I got a little bit closer and had a little bit more room to work with the wreck. So you can kind of start to see some of the details, but you still can't even see the ocean floor. There's me again. You can compare the sizes of this beautiful wreck to me. She's a big ship. But very quickly, my time in the water was over, and we started to head back to our ship. And during this, everyone was kind of looking back at the governor as it was getting smaller and smaller behind us, saying goodbye to this gorgeous wreck. I was sitting on the Zodiac, cold and a little defeated by my split shots, and I thought about how the governor had been sitting in that exact spot since 1915, and how over the decades the cold Antarctic waters have slowly preserved much of its beautiful structure. And what once was this symbol of amazing industrial power is now just part of the landscape down there. And there's something kind of humbling about that history, especially when you've just spent like 15 minutes stressing out about a hazy waterline. The wreck doesn't need the shot to exist. I was just a person with the camera who got to be there for a little bit of time and wanted to do the wreck some justice. But that experience at Governor actually pushed me to try to experiment a bit more with split shots that like I said, I've had very little experience with them. And later in the expedition, I actually got to try again, but this time with penguins. We have these adorable little Adelie penguins. And these photos kind of ended up being some of my favorites from that trip. We were just snorkeling with them, and it really made me feel like the frustrations of the split shots from Governor really made it worth it for me. So yeah, these little guys were very, very fun. They move around very quickly. Here they are again on this iceberg, and I was so happy, so happy I was able to get part of the iceberg for that split shot. Here's the little colony. You can see more of them on the left side there. They were just so stinking cute. But anyways, Antarctica has this way of making every little thing feel super connected. Like from sleeping wrapped around my camera through the Drake, the flooded glove on the first dive, the iceberg dive where I had to simplify everything mid-water, and the leopard seal encounter, and jumping back in at Governor when I was cold and tired and out of time. And these moments while I was there, they didn't really feel like a clean narrative when I was in them. They just felt more like a series of decisions, one after the next, and usually made quite fast and usually with incomplete information. But coming home and sitting with all of it, I started to see the through line. I think what surprised me the most was how personal I got and how the mental pressure really started stacking up on me. I went on this expedition knowing I had something to prove. I had, blue-green expeditions. I had to prove that I could do it for myself, for my family, and to the images I said that I could come back with. And that pressure was real, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't shaping my choices underwater or how I was moving through everything in my mind. Because pressure and opportunity are a combination that kind of really does change you. And I think if I'm being honest about it, it was the part that made me grow the most as a photographer when I was there. Antarctica gave me some of the best images of my career as of now, but also some of the cleanest and clearest lessons I've ever gotten as a diver or a photographer. But one of the biggest lessons I think I brought back was that the environment you're in will always reflect the quality of decisions that you make. So it doesn't matter if you're diving at the bottom of the world, or if you're diving in Florida, or if you're 20 feet off the coast of Seattle, you're always managing the same tension between what you want from a dive and what the dive is actually going to give you. The ocean does not care about your shot list. It doesn't really care about your portfolio. And for me, the sooner I stopped fighting that and started working within what I was, the conditions or the animals I was given, the better photographer I became. And I really do have Antarctica to thank for that. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Bella. That was awesome. I think we have some time now to open it up to questions. Um, and we've also got quite a few comments in the chat as well. Kevin wants to know, can these regulators withstand tropical water? I don't know if that's a joke.
It's not a joke. No, no, I'm serious. I was always curious.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the regulators, yes, they are good in tropical waters. You just have what you have to be specific about is having regulators that are good for cold water diving. So I made sure that those were approved before getting in the water with them.
The reason I ask is because when I'm working towards diving in Antarctica, and if I were to get my own regulators, I would want ones that would work well in Antarctic water just as well as they would work in, say, tropical water. I would want both.
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely prioritize what would work well in the cold water before you prioritize tropical.
Okay.
Perfect. There were some other comments. Nicholas was remarking on the 30-foot swells. I mean, I think all our jaws dropped hearing your story
Yes.
about the drake
Oh
shape.
my goodness.
Rick said Fiji's sounding better and better. And then Karen Doby, one of our members, had a question. Did you do anything special to your camera gear or configuration to accommodate the extreme cold?
Um, Not in the sense where I had to buy anything specific, but I was like obsessed with making sure my O-rings were good and, lubed up because the O-rings kind of they're a bit more difficult to work with in the cold. They can shrink and then your housing can flood. So that was the one thing that I was like extra cautious about was the O-rings, but nothing else for the camera gear I had to change. I changed the regulator system, of course, and I added a few extra layers under my dry suit, and that was kind of it.
Great. We had lots of great comments regarding
Uh,
your storytelling skills and everything. Dennis wanted to know about some of the dangers about diving next to icebergs, if you were concerned.
yeah, yes. I know maybe I seem brave from all these stories, but I'm actually not the bravest person in the world. So I think the whole time I was a little like, kind of concerned about being next to the iceberg. And like I mentioned, that was my first iceberg dive. I know other people go elsewhere for them and have other experience with it. But I was a first timer there and it was my one and only iceberg dive. So yeah, I was concerned for sure.
I think you're pretty brave.
Thank you.
And then Rick wants to know how your finger's doing. Did your nerve
Yeah.
damage?
It took about 3 or 4 months before I had the feeling back in my finger. It's fine now. It's weird. Like when I dive here in Seattle, it's the first thing that gets the coldest. I don't know if that's just a mental thing because I think about the finger, but that's kind of the residue of what I was left with. But it really, really hurt. Like the whole trip, when I was pressing down on that trigger, I could feel the nerve damage, and it did not feel good. So it was very inconvenient.
I can imagine. Opening it up to anyone else who wants to come off mute and ask their questions live.
I have another question actually.
Yeah.
Yep. And this isn't a joke either. Like, did you dive in any sites where they're reputed to any colossal squid sightings?
No, we didn't do any of those. But that it would be really cool. That'd be scary.
Yes. Sharks wouldn't make me nervous. I always joke, but if it were a humble, giant, or colossal squid, I'd be nervous.
Yeah, that's very fair.
Steve was asking, he said he may have missed it, but did you get into how you organize the packing? I remember seeing all your suitcases, but how did you
Yeah,
break it down?
that is a really good question. So my this is a huge blessing for me, but I am sponsored by Think Tank Photography, so they sent me a ton of like the hard shell luggage. So all my very important camera stuff was in my carry-on and my personal item. Very, very heavy and extremely overweight. I was just praying to whoever that they wouldn't weigh my luggage before getting on the plane. And then all the things that went into the Cotopaxi duffel bags, we had to use like duffel bags or things that could kind of store really nice because we didn't have a lot of storage in those rooms. So all those luggage stuff just kind of went under the beds. So I used the duffel bags. And in one of the duffel bags, I put all my clothes and like toiletries and whatnot. And then the second duffel bag I had all my scuba gear. And then the third, or like I had anything that I could use that I could snorkel with. And then the third bag I had all the scuba stuff like the regs and all that. Because in my mind I was thinking, okay, if my duffel bag with clothes doesn't show up, I can just buy clothes when I'm in Ushuaia. And then I was thinking, okay, if my snorkeling stuff doesn't arrive, then I'll just do topside photography for the whole expedition. And if my scuba duffel bag doesn't show up, then I'm not scuba diving, but I can still snorkel, you know? So it's just kind of, I was really mentally preparing for every worst possible outcome.
That's smart. So you don't lose everything at once.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyone else?
I have another question. Sorry. What invertebrates did you see? Like, did you see any like invertebrates on the dives?
We, if I'm being honest, I didn't really see much of those, but I was also like, I wasn't really shooting macros, kind of paying attention to the bigger stuff. I know a lot of people saw like little crabs. I didn't even see a fish when I was there. Some people saw urchins and whatnot, but it just kind of flew over my head, honestly.
Okay.
How many dives did you actually have while you were there?
Hmm, I think I did 7 total dives and some snorkeling as well. I don't remember how many days of snorkeling we did, but it
Mhm.
was a good mix of the two.
I have a question about the halicline around the icebergs. It's really fascinating, the density changes between the saltwater and the freshwater.
Yeah.
But did you notice a temperature change between the two? Because I know saltwater
No,
can get,
honestly,
30 degrees or 28 degrees or whatever it is, right? But freshwater,
yeah.
can't. So I don't know. But I mean, you have all that dry suit on and everything. Maybe it wasn't clear, but I
Right.
thought maybe.
That's a really good point. You could see like how your computer shows the temperature. There was definitely a temperature change on that. But with like you said with so much stuff, it was just cold. It wasn't too
Yeah, that's
much
fair.
yeah. But there was definitely the temperature change was definitely there. Yeah.
And could you see the, if you got a like a thermocline, you can see the separation of the two
Yeah,
layers. So did you kind of know when you were getting into one or the other and accommodate accordingly?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. You could see it. Um and it was you could even kind of like pick it up in some of the photos that it was there, which I thought was kind of cool to see afterwards, but you could definitely tell, which was good because you knew that your buoyancy was going to start to shift. So it was kind of a nice reminder to check where you were at in the water.
Did you discover any of that at the time, like during the dive? Like, oh God, I just dropped 20 feet. I didn't mean to. Or were you really well prepped by the dive guides and the trip leaders on all of
Yeah,
these? Yeah.
yeah, we were really, really well prepped. Like they really sat us down and they kind of ran these iceberg dives like the military. They were like, these are the things that could happen. These are the things that will happen. And one of the things that they said that will happen was the change in your buoyancy and whatnot. So I already knew that it was going to occur before I got in the water, but so I was very aware of it, which was good. But it definitely, like, it was definitely there. It definitely happened. Thankfully, I feel like our group warned us enough to really pay attention to it.
Got it. Well, thank you. That was a really interesting talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, super fascinating. And Bella, be sure to check out the chat because lots of really nice comments regarding your presentation.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Thank you so much, everyone. This is very, very sweet.
Yes, thank you. And you're welcome to hang out with us through the rest of our meeting as we
For
discuss
sure.
business. Or if you need to hop, we understand as well. But
I'll stay.
all right.